Hello. So let's begin. So I'm Mohammed Siddiqui on behalf of Beyond Boundaries. Welcome you all to the fifth edition of our public talk series titled 2022 Iran Uprising and the Global Struggle for Emancipation. So this will be our topic for today's discussion. So today our speaker is Dr. Chowra Makaremi, who is an award-winning director and anthropologist currently associated with the National Center for the Scientific Research, Paris, France. She works at the intersection of state, violence, and migration. Her recent book, Woman, Life, Freedom, Echoes of a Revolutionary Uprising in Iran, published with Yoda Press in 2025, narrates the joyful resistance of gender and ethnic minorities in a society which she argues has been built on the segregation and domination of women. It is worth noting that Dr. Makaremi's pursuit for freedom is informed by her subjective experience in the world of state violence. Her mother, Fatima Zahrawi, was killed during the infamous prison massacre in 1988, which Amnesty International described as one of the most heinous chapters of state violence in Iran's recent history. Not so long ago, in the summer of 2022, Gina Mahsa Amini was brutally beaten up by Iran's Gazette-e-Irshad. Basically, it's the morality police that accused her of improperly wearing the obligatory hijab or the Islamic headscarf. She died after 3 days of coma, triggering protests across the country and abroad, with tens of thousands of individuals, male and female, young and old, wheeled and unwheeled, coming out to the streets, sloganeering against the Iranian regime. Women refused to wear the hijab, some even jubilantly burning them in the public sight. Songs of resistance were composed in astute solidarity with the non-violent protest. What followed, certainly for not the first time, was a spat of state repression, which involved detentions, arrest, and execution of defiant citizens. Gina Mahsa's identity was more than just that of a woman. She was a Sunni Muslim from a Kurdish ethnic background, thus subjecting her to the triple discrimination on grounds of gender, religion, and ethnicity within a patriarchal Iranian Shiite socio-political environment. Dr. Makaremi indicates in her work how daily violence subsumes the lives of religions, religious, racial, and gender minorities in Iran. Women, Sunnis, Kurds, Baluchis, Iranian Arabs, Baha'is, Afghan refugees, and so on. It is here that we push the limits of analyzing the contemporary form of resistance as one which tends to incorporate a plurality of actors that have been at the receiving end of the state and capitalist violence. It is precisely here that we try to make sense of the genesis, structure, and the future of the Jian Azadi movement in Iran against the wider spectrum of resistance movements across the globe. Special mention can be made of the pro-Palestine protest in the American university campuses, pro-Ukrainian demonstrations, the anti-fascist protest in Europe, and the decade-long struggle against the Assad regime in Syria. What does real emancipation mean for the oppressed? What are the means to achieve the freedom of life? More so, how justified is setting ethical standards in pursuit of freedom? These are some of the broader conceptual tropes that can offer a more nuanced understanding of the ongoing protest in Iran. So, without much delay, let us start today's session. Dr. Makaremi, the stage is.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. And to be in conversation with you today, it means a lot. I was thinking that in order to present this book that is on sale here as well, I can start as an introduction to present how the context has shifted between the time that the uprising took place in Iran in 2022 and 23, and the time I wrote the book immediately during the uprisings and immediately after. So the uprising took place from September 22 up until, let's say, January 23. People were in the street, and this is by very far the longest uprisings in terms of duration that happened since the revolution of 1979 Iran. And I wrote the book during the uprisings and immediately after. But by the time it was translated in English, something else happened that for me has shifted totally the reception and even the international geopolitical context in which we think, you know, the fight for emancipation, which is of course the 7th of October and the aftermath, the genocidal war of the state of Israel against the Palestinians, particularly in Gaza. So I think it's important because what happened during and right after October 7th and throughout the genocide is that there were some geopolitical frames, reels that came and took the place for us of maybe grills of analysis that we had before. And so I think it's very important to go back there and to understand how can we think, how can we learn from the women life freedom uprisings in the world after the genocide of the Palestinians. And I think it's important to acknowledge the changes because there were at least 3 radical shifts that have happened since then. The first one is that we entered an era where only state actors matter. And non-state actors that are here, but in the weakness or absence of state. So yes, we have Hezbollah, for instance, in Lebanon, is a non-state actor. Hamas is in between, and then you have Israel, Iran, the US. So those what we call cold monsters, no, in international relations, with their game of interest, powers. And it's at this level of the nation state now that everything is considered. And what we are kind of forgetting in the process is how exactly before this shift, those very states, each of them have been dramatically challenged by their civil society. So it's a movement that the year maybe 2019 has been best embodying, a year that started with actually in December 2018 with the revolution in Sudan, and then there was the protests in Lebanon, and then there were the protests in Iraq, and then there were also major protests in Chile, I don't know if you remember, in Poland, and then there were also a protest movement in Iran that was not the Women Life Freedom Uprising, that was another wave of protest of the urban youth, poor youth, in demands of economic dignity in November. And then there was also Shaheen Bagh that started at this time. So, and a little bit before that, before the Sudanese revolution, there was the 2018 return march in Gaza. So it's and it kind of never ended up until 2022, because after those movements lasted even through COVID. Some of them were shot by COVID. Some of them lasted through COVID. For instance, in Iraq, and then September 2022 was the Women, Life, Freedom uprisings, but I really understand these uprisings in this wave of a global wave of uprisings that happened around the globe in the last few years that have challenged very seriously the government. And the very interesting thing is that each time they have been kind of pointed as very extraordinary uprisings by their observers. Like, for instance, what happened in Lebanon was called the revolution. And I don't know if you remember, because we don't talk about them anymore, they've been forgotten. But they were there, and the Lebanese called them a revolution. And why? Because for the first time, they were beyond sectarian politics. And the young Lebanese that were on the street, identified as Lebanese, and didn't identify within the sectarian partisan politics. And in Iraq, it was the same thing. It was the idea of national identity, in Iraqi national identity, and the fight against corruption. And I think maybe also here in India, with the Shaheen Bagh sitting, was also, the Save the Constitution in defense of a certain idea of the nation and of the Indian democracy. So there is this, there are these movements, and there is a process of forgetting that took place around how these movements of civil society have been. Have gone out of our frame of analysis and interpretation, and we have refocused entirely on the states. And those states that we have refocused on are heavily militarized and extremely not only patriarchal, but anchored in a type of militarized masculinity, be it Israel, be it Iran, I think also be it India. And now in the US we can see it. We can see it in, like, really all over the globe. We can see it in Russia as well. Like, it's like at some level masculinism, this kind of performance of a very anti, gender equity, very masculine, militarized subjectivity has taken the place of any kind of other ideology. We can see also with Milei, for instance, in Argentina. So we have a thread, and what is, for me, what was very important, because I studied international relations long ago. I'm an anthropologist, but I have some knowledge in international relations because of my studies. And what is very interesting is that we kind of, it's like we are not making full sense. We still don't have really the frames to, we haven't cracked the code, as we say, no? We haven't encrypted the kind of a more global meaning, both of how reactionary neo-fascist state ideologies have been reorganized around the patriarchal reactions, and on the other side, we haven't cracked the code, we haven't understood those global uprisings that happen around the globe and that have been also repressed everywhere, but have politicized a whole generation of young citizens. So I think that I wanted to remind this context, because if we forget it, then it's easier to go back into seeing the enemy of our enemy as our friend. So what is happening, for instance, I'm working on Iran, and I've written, something to record the memory, because I think it's very important, of the Women, Life, Freedom uprisings, because uprisings is not only when they succeed into becoming revolutionary that they're important, it's the way they are opening up avenues, tactics, they're showing up, how people become politicized, what is the power also of collective emotions, what is the political power of collective emotions. And all these is very fragile, because it's on our social networks. We saw the videos, we hear the speeches, but then there are as many, narratives, histories of these uprisings as they are digital identities. Your wall is showing you one story. My wall is showing me one story, and all these walls actually are kind of fragmenting and making it very difficult to have a collective kind of narrative and maybe memory of what has happened. And this is why, for me, it was important to record, create a very down-to-earth micro, archive of what happened in the everyday of the uprisings. Things that will not be recorded maybe in greater history, even more so if the uprising is not, successful at the end. And we know that the success of revolution is not only linked to intrinsic internal factors, it's also very much linked to external, geopolitical contexts and power gains. And this goes back to the idea of uneven and combined development by Trotsky. But there is this link between the internal and the external that reminds us that if a revolutionary movement fails, it's not only because of internal weakness, it's also because the international power game is really crucial in making the shift within those revolutionary attempts. So in any case, usually when uprisings are crushed or defeated, what remains of them afterwards? What do we have? And the problem with all those videos and social networking is that since the videos are online, well, we have them at a disposal. We don't really think about building those archiving those memories. And it was very important, I think, to build a collective, a narrative of the uprisings that would be something that could be shared by many people, and well beyond Iran, I think, because there is something that goes well beyond Iran in how in 2022 feminist beliefs and feminist politics have triggered the revolutionary potential for change in a society, and they were able to articulate at the level of a whole, country, a demand for radical change, not only amelioration, not only reform, but really they were able to articulate for the first time in the post-revolution history antagonistic position of the civil society against the state, which means that it was the articulation of a radical opposition. We want a regime change. We don't want this dictatorship anymore. So it was women, life, freedom, and down with the dictator, which were the two main slogans that came together. Actually, one was kind of implying the other, and so I think that this legacy of how this feminist politics that doesn't go back to 2022 but has a very long history in Iran, in post-revolution Iran, how this feminist legacy also was able to create that conjunction, coagulation, coming together of the very different groups, and I can go back to that, very different groups and very different parts of society that united for the first time, which makes the Women Life Freedom Uprisings so exceptional. We are now, again, if we go back to that nation-state perspective, and the idea that in a state of war, as we are since the attacks on Gaza, in this state of war, the enemy of my enemy becomes my friend. So Iran is part of the axis of resistance. The Iranian state is one of the Islamic Republic is one of the only countries in the world and in the Middle East that very unequivocally, very firmly, absolutely condemned the genocide of the Palestinians by Gaza, and also was building what they called this axis of resistance with Hamas, with Hezbollah. And in this context, then people, make choice, and the most important thing seems to be not harming a state that is one of the only defender of this of the Palestinians. We are in a situation where our eyes seems so much burned by like extreme violence and the live stream genocide and the death politics, this kind of horror show that we see on our social media that is happening in Gaza, that it's very difficult to go back in the low intensity everyday state repression and crimes that the Iranian state is doing against its own citizens. Because of course it's not comparable. And of course, the intensity of destruction and death and injustice that we are witnessing makes it very difficult to go back and pay attention to what happened at the level of society before we shifted into that, what some scholars have called this global war regime. So in the face of that, again, I think that one of the legacies of feminist politics is to try to think beyond the binaries. So interesting. And really is how can we think without that very specific, very harmful, I think, slogan that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. What if the enemy of my enemy is not my friend? And what if these nation states, militarized, patriarchal, have in common is way more important for us to fight than what is dividing them. And as an example, I can tell you how the state of Israel's technologies for fighting its own opponents, citizens that are opponents, and building state propaganda by assimilating all the people who are critical of the state to internal enemies that work in hand with an external enemy. All these techniques are very, very similar to what the Islamic Republic has used in order to build itself through the war with Iraq during the first 8 years after the 1979 revolution. So what I'm doing also in the book is going back and the form of chronicles, the everyday of the revolt, allows me to go back and forth because it's date by date, and I can touch upon a series of themes, making links between dates as well, anniversaries or the genesis, of a movement. For instance, I use the excuse or the occasion of the crushing of the university, the Sharif University in Tehran, on the 3rd of October 2022, in order to explain the longer student movement in Iran and the 1999 student protest, how it has been crushed, how student movement has embraced reformism and has radicalized itself and etc. So to make a history of that student movement. And it's, I do the same with a lot of the dimensions of what makes Iranian society and resistance. And one of the things also that I'm looking at, because I look at it in my studies, in my research, is how the Iranian national identity in the Islamic Republic has been built on the concepts on two notions: the martyr and the enemy. And and looking at how it has been built on this notion of the enemy, identifying every opponent as a potential, not an opponent but an enemy of the state. Then there is this whole technology and propaganda of how how a nation, what I call a fiction of power and legitimacy is built through war, through violence after the revolution. And if we don't have this longer term perspective, we don't understand what has been radically challenged by the women life freedom movement. Because as I say, when Gina Mahsa Amini was killed by the morality police, and yet again you did very well to remind that she was a Kurdish woman. She was not only a woman, but she was from a national ethnic minority and religious minority. And people, it was very important for people because she was killed because she was a woman, but also because she was Kurdish. Because all Kurdish bodies are subjected to a lot of police violence in Iran. But in any case, when she was killed, a video circulated on the internet and went viral. And this video shows Gina Mahsa Amini in a red dress, red traditional Kurdish dress, dancing a traditional Kurdish dance. And here we have the body and the dance of the image of a young woman who has been killed, but who is not a martyr. You know, they could have also show her with a very black, clothes and a very sad picture, and with all the respect and the imagery that is, of devotion to the martyrs. But it was not the case. It was a joyful dance. So we have the body of a woman who has been killed, but is not a martyr, who is Kurdish, but is not an enemy. And it's very important. And it's not only Gina Mahsa. Khoda Noor, a young Baluchi man, was also killed in October. More than 500 people have been killed. But was also one of the protesters who's been killed in Baluchistan. And right after his death, a video of him dancing as well circulated on the internet. So it's very important to understand how the resistance of the people also came by challenging the pillars of how state ideology and state legitimacy, state discourse of fiction of power have been built. And it is in this sense that the uprisings are revolutionary. So if we go back to that, then Iran and Israel have a lot in common, actually, in the way they function, in the way they, subjugate their population and the population they want to colonize. Just some other shifts that I think are very, very important, and this book, I'm trying to both explain what makes it maybe more difficult to read it today than a few years ago or when it happened, but also maybe at sometimes why it maybe matters still to remember those struggles and learn from them. The other point is, of course, so I talk about two shifts. The third shift is how, of course, the global, the tremendous hypocrisy of the West, and the double standards, and the differential compassion, and the turning a blind eye to all the tools, institutional tools of the international community, such as the ICG, such as the Human Rights Special Rapporteur work on Palestine, and overlooking all those institutional work that qualify, what Israel has done as state crimes. How all this is building an environment where human rights and the fight for equity of rights don't mean anything anymore. They just mean, they just, all these concepts, politically, the concept of equity, legally the concepts of human rights or women rights, seems to be like tools that are in the hand of the West when it pleases them, and are totally absent and overlooked otherwise. So in this context, of course, the fight of the Iranian women and civil society for gender equity, for, of course, human rights in Iran, seems a tool instrumentalized by the West, you know, in order to fight against Iran. And I think this is also where we have to really anchor our analysis and our solidarity within the people that are on site, like for instance, activists in Iran, and what sense do they make of these words? How do they fight for them? How do they believe in them? And how do they use them as a way to challenge state power? And in this sense, again, what the book is reminding is how there is a very long tradition of feminist politics in Iran. And I'm criticizing and also deconstructing, you know, this Western idea that Iranian women woke up in 2022 and, you know, taking off the veil was kind of a way of waking up for women. So this is the colonial legacy of specifically French and English efforts to reframe the question of the unveiling as a kind of liberation, and they have done that since the colonial, you know, since the colonial period. This is not the problem of the Iranian women. It doesn't have anything to do with them. Their problem is elsewhere with the veil, of course. And their problem is exactly, and they've been, of course, awake for a very long time, because the civil society movements that were the strongest in Iranian society since the 1990s were the women movements, were the feminist movements. Why? Because, as you know, philosopher Michel Foucault says, resistance always starts on the point of application of power. So if you have a state that is building its control on gender segregation and the control of women in the public space, then resistance also starts from there. And Iranian, and it's very important to understand the long-term, you know, fight of Iranian feminism, because the Iranian women haven't targeted the veil as their main problem first. For decades, they have not touched upon this issue because, of course, it was not the most important for them. For them, what was the most important? It was that it was to have equal rights. It was that there, for instance, equal rights for inheritance, equal opportunities to the job market, that their testimony in front of the law, you know, equals that of a man. Now it's only half of that of a man. To have some rights in terms of custody and divorce, etc., etc. So of course they focused on that. And since they knew that the veil was a red line for the state, they didn't go and touch the red line. They wanted to reform their conditions within the framework of the Islamic Republic. And it is only when they came to the conclusion that the system was not reformable and they had to oppose it radically, then they choose the veil as a symbolic confrontation, radical confrontation with the state. And this is why they chose the veil strategically as a language, a grammar of revolt. Just the way they had avoided to touch on the issue of the veil very strategically before that. So there is a strategic shift within the methods and the resistance in civil society that is anchored in the idea that radical opposition to the state is possible again. And this is a way for Iranian society to have kind of remembered a lost memory, a forgotten memory of resistance. Because what happened, and what I study in my other research, is how the Islamic Republic was built after the 79 revolution on the crushing of any kind of opposition to the project of the Islamic Republic. So much so that the mere idea of radical opposition to the core, you know, to the Islamic Republic as a project was eradicated from Iranian public space. So you had a civil society, but within the framework of the Islamic Republic. You could be political and you could be an activist within the framework of the Islamic Republic and within the red lines. And what happened in 2022, the Women Life Freedom Uprisings, and I think this is also a feminist legacy, it's that position of antagonism. They went and really performed a radical opposition. And this is something that we, I think, have to also, something that can be useful for us. And I will end here because another shift, something else that the global war regime that we now live in has been doing with Gaza and with, I think, maybe other Gazas to come, because what I'm afraid very personally is that it's so useful in terms of government, the creation of that double standards, the creation of a state of extreme radical injustice that you are not allowed to denounce. This is doing something to us as global citizens, all of us, and this is doing something to especially ethnic minorities and Muslim minorities in many countries, in the West, maybe in India as well. So what this is doing in terms of governmentality, of governing, is that it's deactivating us, it's making us full of rage, full of hate, full of despair, full of feeling of being powerless. We are seeing the images every day of live stream genocide, and we cannot even say it's a genocide. So this is making something, it's about governing us through sad emotions. And this is exactly doing this at a moment where, more than ever, we need, a very drastic, to think about political alternatives to get out of the regime of extractivist, neoliberal exploitation that we live in, because it's like we have to come up with resistance. So it's exactly deactivating us at that place that needs to be activated, put in common, and that we need to inhabit today. And this is why I think also the Women Life Freedom Uprisings and its also feminist legacy is so important, because as you said, there was joy in this protest. There was a lot of hope. There was performance of the absence of fear. There was the coming back of courage, of bravery and stubbornness as positive values, which was not the case in the Iranian society in the last decades. And what happened with the Women Life Freedom Uprisings is that throughout, decades of post-revolution terror and then decades of government of the Islamic Republic, what the engineering that the state did at the level of values and emotion was to convince citizens, Iranians, that prudence and moderation were political virtues, and that bravery and radical opposition was immaturity. It was what co-produces political violence, so that people who were radical were kind of co-responsible of the degree of violence of the state against them. So this has been, and I'm looking in my work at how they put that in the head of people and convince people that this was the case. Because something very important to understand is that terror doesn't create only fear, terror creates consent. And in this way, there is this kind of government of us through our emotions. So what happened in the Women Life Freedom Uprisings was how courage and bravery came back at the forefront. Those women who, even today, unveil themselves in the public sphere, or shout, or even undress themselves in the public sphere. A few maybe years ago, they would have been labeled by Iranians themselves as hysterical, as unbalanced, young women. Now they are labeled as brave, as courageous, and their act is seen as a political form of resistance through the body. So this shift we have to learn from, and borrow and be inspired by this idea of putting back maybe how to how to counter attack those attacks on one of our basic rights, our basic constitution, that is our emotional life, collective and individual. So being re-empowered where those technical and state-governed tools want to make us feel dispossessed, depressed, powerless, etc. So this is why I wrote this book, and I hope you can read it and engage with it and be in discussion with what the Iranian legacy of resistance has been. Just something I wanted to add for that was that what it shows, all this, is that bravery, courage, is not a personal virtue, because Iranian society, people in the Iranian society have not valued bravery for a long time, and they have not chosen courage as their value, and then they shifted and they did choose courage as their value. So it's not something that is a personal virtue that someone has and the other has not. It's like really bravery and courage is a way to see, it's an economy of action, future, hope, and how you put all these together in order to act or not. So this is also one of the main learnings, I think, for us of this uprising.